All right, it's 8:42 on Friday morning, and we're nearing the end of our program here today, and it's a big day, and we'll get to that coming up. One more big issue we want to hit on here this morning is the DA in Herkimer County, Jeff Carpenter, took some swipes, political swipes, if you will, earlier in the week when his opponent Mike Daly came on concerning a couple of issues, and we've given Jeff Carpenter, the DA, an opportunity to answer to those, and he's on the line now. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Keeler. How are you?
I'm good. I'm assuming at this point you've had a chance to hear the charges that Mike Daly made earlier.
I did, yes.
And one was a specific case concerning a molestation case.
Okay.
And why don't we get into that one, because he said that your office could have prosecuted for a number of different crimes that were committed on about 10 different people, but you chose to do one, and which was a really big charge that came from him, saying that you did it just to keep your numbers looking good.
Yeah, and obviously that charge is baseless, both in fact and the circumstances of that case. You know, Mr. Daly came on your show, I believe it was on Monday, to respond to some statistics that I had provided your office on an earlier segment.
Yes. Yep.
And basically those statistics show that the overall index crime rate in Herkimer County is the lowest it has been in 25 years, in the years 2014 and 2015. Now, obviously, Mr. Daly was the district attorney for 9 of those years contained in that 25-year period, so he has to come on and try to now defend why his statistics were so low, especially when compared to the crime rates being the best they have ever been under my regime. And in doing so, he immediately launched into a dissertation on 2 cases that I recently handled. Now, Bill, I'm not going to get into the particulars of either one of those cases. I'm just not going to do it.
I actually appreciate that, because it puts us in a difficult position legally, to be honest.
Sure. And, you know, his point that he was trying to make and did not do so was that I manipulate the statistics. The statistics that I have given you and that I can provide you in writing or the website that you could check yourself, these are based on crimes reported to the police. It's not how many arrests there are. It's not what the people get charged for. It's when the victim picks up the phone and calls the police and said, my house was burglarized, or I was raped, whatever the charge is. That's what triggers those statistics. So it's not the handling of the case later on where I'm able to manipulate those numbers. I would have to prevent victims from calling the police in the first time. So to look at any case I've handled does not support his argument that the numbers are being manipulated. They can't be by the district attorney's office.
He did make charges in the 2 cases. I'd like you to respond to those if you could, and again, if we cannot use names in the cases. One, as Bill referenced earlier, involved an incident or possibly a series of incidents involving molestation. Mm-hmm. He claimed there were scores of felonies committed with dozens of victims, and the case was settled with
I think he said there were about a dozen victims, or maybe 10 victims, but there were several
Well, actually, no, he said there were dozens of young boys.
Okay,
and that's taken out of the clip that's online right now. And that, again, I had the police charge 1 count of a course of sexual conduct against a child.
Correct.
With regard to 1 victim.
Yep.
That part is true. What was going on in this investigation is that we learned that the defendant in this case was potentially leaving the state. And as a result of that, when that information got to me, I said to the police, let's pick our best case with our strongest victim and go arrest them. And that's what happened in this case. We then prepared the case for the grand jury presentation. During that time, my office sat with those victims, sat with their parents, sat with the police, looked over the evidence in the case, and the case was ultimately resolved at a 9-year determinate sentence with 20 years of post-release supervision. All right? Now, Mr. Daly, and I think, Bill, you did a really nice job with that, because you said, well, okay, you're criticizing Carpenter, Mr. Daly, what would you have done differently? And he hesitated before he answered, but he then said, I would have indicted them on as many as I could.
Yeah,
that was his response.
Yes.
Well, to me, for a candidate for district attorney to make that statement, and even more egregious for a former prosecutor to make that, just defies logic. How can Mr. Daly say what he would have done in a criminal case when he has not looked at a single piece of evidence, when he did not interview the law enforcement personnel at the time, when he did not sit down with the victims in the case, and when he did not sit down with the families of those victims? How can he make a statement what he would do with a case with no knowledge of the case whatsoever? Because I'm going to tell you, that's careless and it's irresponsible. There were children involved in this case, and it is not the job of the district attorney to beat his own drum and to prosecute people because it makes him look better. It is the best interest of those children that must control. And again, I'm not going to get into the specifics, but I can tell you this. When we resolved that case, we had the full support of those children, their families, and the law enforcement personnel that handled the case.
The other issue was the burglary issue that was going on, and he said that you were able to reopen the case.
Bill, I want to go back to the first case first,
okay,
because you gave Mr. Daly 12 minutes to discuss things that were absolutely not true, so I'm going to respond.
Which is why you're here. That's why we have you here.
Secondly, there were not dozens of young boys. That's clearly not true. Again, I'm not going to give you a number because this case comes from a small community, and I'm not going to take the chance on identifying any of these victims. He then made the statement, because I guess it's a good soundbite for radio, that this defendant will be out of prison before these children graduate high school. He said that on 2 occasions during that show.
I recall that.
Well, I can tell you this, that the youngest victim was born in 2002. So unless that person, who is now approximately 14 years old, is going to spend the next 7 years in high school, that statement is, again, blatantly false. But it's a nice soundbite. It's good for ratings, but it's not true. All right? This defendant is not eligible for release until June of 2023.
Jeff, technically, that's an unfair swipe at us. We're interviewing a candidate who's making charges against you. It's not for ratings, and by the way, we're out of a ratings period anyway. It has nothing to do with ratings. Maybe good for getting people to consider voting for him, but it has nothing to do with ratings.
Well, again, though, I think that as, you know, if you're a journalist, if you're putting us on your show that could potentially affect an upcoming election for a very important position, I think there is some duty, honestly, on whether it's a newspaper, radio, television station, to check some of the facts that people are putting out there.
That's why you're here.
Yeah. Well,
and we do that, and that is why you're here.
What everybody says. I'm here to tell you what the truth is.
We don't know these cases. He was throwing names out. We have no idea. We would have no idea.
Right.
Which is why we brought you on to be able to, to be able to give your side of the story. It's not about ratings here. It has nothing to do. And as I said, we're out of a ratings period. So that's an unfair swipe at us.
Well,
this is giving you the opportunity to speak to what your opponent in a political campaign has charged. Welcome to an election. That's what this is.
Well, I've been in elections, Bill. I understand that.
But I do understand that.
But again, I do feel, whether you agree or not, that whether it's the newspaper, radio, television, whatever, there is a certain duty on the part of the media to keep people in check. So
and Mr.
that's
Carpenter,
what I'm doing.
I think we hold that duty, and we take that duty very seriously.
Yeah, this isn't about us. This is your opportunity to speak to your opponent. And during a debate, he's going to say it right to your face, and you're going to have to respond.
Well, I'm not worried about that. I'm just saying
all right.
that.
So on the issue of the other case, anything else you want to add on this one?
Yeah, I want to add that Mr. Daly implies that case should have been prosecuted differently, that I potentially should have indicted everybody, even though the children did not want to testify, and that I should have taken the case to trial. I want to tell you about what happens when we do take a case to trial. Obviously, if a prosecutor takes a case to trial, there's a chance that the defendant could be acquitted. That has an effect on the victims in the case. But secondly, even if a conviction is obtained in a trial, that does not end the criminal proceeding. You know, we have appeals to the appellate division. They can appeal to the Court of Appeals. They can appeal federally. And I can give you 2 cases that I have prosecuted and tried. One is a case involving, again, I won't mention any names as you've asked, involving the rape of an unconscious woman. I tried that case back in 2011. The defendant was found guilty and sentenced to 18 years in state prison. He then appealed it to the appellate division in Rochester. They affirmed the conviction but reduced his sentence to 10 years, saying it was harsh and excessive. He then appealed that decision to the Court of Appeals, who again affirmed the decision, but that occurred in 2013. So from a case that started in 2011 for this victim, I have had to call the victim and say, well, now he's appealing his conviction, and explain that to him. And then I have to call back and say, well, now they've reduced his sentence in Rochester, had nothing to do with us. Then he's appealing to the Court of Appeals. These cases, even when you have a trial and a conviction, these cases do not end for the victims. So to take a plea in a case such as this involving children was absolutely the right thing to do. There's finality. They don't have to worry about it getting overturned. He waived his right to appeal. They never had to testify. They were never cross-examined. So, again, when I decide to offer a disposition in a case, I take into account the effect it'll have on the victims, the effect it'll have on the defendant, certainly, the effect it'll have on my community, and then I make the right decision. And that's what I did in that case. Okay,
the other issue he brought up was the burglary, and apparently there were victims who were burglarized.
That's correct.
You had gone back to a judge and had it reopened, and there was money exchanged. I didn't follow the entire case, but we did do some follow-up on that, and we're told that you could not have accomplished this alone. You would obviously have had a judge that would agree to in some way reopen the case.
Well, exactly. And I don't bring people into court like that. The courts do. And in this case, the defendants on the original burglary conviction in county court walked in and pled to the charge with no agreement with the people. I did not enter into a plea agreement with them. They pled to the charge. The sentencing judge in that case and the judge who handled that case made many representations to these defendants that he would do certain things for them that he didn't follow through on. He ultimately sentenced two of the defendants to 9.5 years determinate. He could have given them 25 or up to 25, and he ultimately sentenced one to 8 years. After their sentences were imposed, they then brought Article 440 motions to get their case back in front of the court. I didn't bring them back. They brought motions, and that's their right to do. And Mr. Daly knows that, and he said there was no legal way to get them back in court. That's how they did it. But because the first judge who had handled that case had been removed from hearing any criminal cases in Herkimer County from that case on, it got assigned to a judge from Lewis County who heard the case. And that judge reduced their sentences. Now, I want to be very clear. When the judge imposed those sentences, he said he was doing it on his own motion and over the objection of the district attorney. I did not consent to that. And the money that did exchange hands, the judge asked the defendants at that point in time, are there any other victims that are still owed money? And there were 3 other victims in the case that had not been made whole. There was about $60,000 in total restitution outstanding, and there was about $10,000 or a little bit more than $10,000 that was still outstanding. So the judge said, I will agree to reduce their sentences over the objection of the people, but I want those other victims made whole, and they were. So the money that did exchange hands, about $62,000, not one penny of it went to the district attorney's office. It went to the victims of the crimes in that case as restitution.
And you objected to, as you mentioned, the court reducing the sentences in exchange for that.
It was over my objection that he reduced the sentences at all. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add?
Yeah. One other aspect to this is that Mr. Daly has charged, as you say, that I plea bargained everything, and there's only been one trial in 4.5 years out of the district attorney's office. That, again, is just blatantly false. We've had 8 trials in the last 4.5 years. I could give you the names of those defendants if you want. I could provide them to you so you could verify them. But we've had 8 trials in the last 4.5 years, not one.
All right. We appreciate your time. People have the opportunity to be able to certainly. This interview will be posted, as well as Mike Daly's interview posted, and the voters get to listen to both of them and decide for themselves. We appreciate your time this morning and clearing up your side of the story.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Jeff Carpenter, the DA in Herkimer County. Quick break. We'll come right back on WIBX.